The champagne flutes clinked together in the mahogany-paneled conference room as my stepmother Victoria raised her glass with a triumphant smile. "To the Blackwood legacy," she announced, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Around the polished table, my half-siblings nodded in agreement, their faces glowing with greed and vindication. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I stood in the doorway, still wearing my coffee-stained apron from the diner, where I'd been working double shifts, watching them celebrate what they believed was their complete victory. The lawyer's manila envelope lay torn open on the table, its contents having just sealed what they thought was my fate: total exclusion from grandfather's will. What they didn't know, as they toasted to their newfound wealth, was that I'd been playing a completely different game, and I'd already won. The rain hammered against the windows of Mel's diner as I wiped down the sticky counter for the third time that morning. My back ached from the overnight shift, and the smell of grease had permanently embedded itself in my uniform. At 26, this wasn't exactly where I'd imagined my life would be. "Order up, Tiffany," called Jake from the kitchen, sliding another plate of eggs and hash browns across the pass. I grabbed it and delivered it to table 7, forcing a smile for the trucker who barely looked up from his newspaper. My phone buzzed against my hip. A text from my half-sister Madison: "Family meeting tonight, 7 p.m. Don't be late for once." I almost laughed. Don't be late for once. As if I was the one who'd been avoiding family gatherings for the past 5 years. Ever since grandfather had his first stroke, Victoria had been systematically freezing me out of everything related to the Blackwood family business. Madison and her twin brother Trevor had been all too happy to go along with it. The bell above the diner door chimed, and I looked up to see a familiar figure in an expensive suit. Marcus Chen, grandfather's longtime business attorney, scanned the room until his eyes found mine. His expression was unreadable, but there was something urgent in the way he approached. "Tiffany," he said quietly, sliding into the booth by the window, "we need to talk." I glanced around the nearly empty diner. My shift ended in an hour, but Mel was in the back doing inventory. "What's this about, Marcus?" He pulled out a thick envelope, his fingers drumming nervously against the table. "Your grandfather's will reading is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, but there's something you need to know first, something that changes everything." My stomach tightened. Grandfather had passed away 3 weeks ago, and I'd barely been allowed to attend the funeral. Victoria had made it clear that as the help's daughter, her charming term for me since my mother had been grandfather's housekeeper before she died, I shouldn't expect anything from the estate. "Let me guess," I said, refilling his coffee cup. "Victoria managed to convince him to write me out completely?" Marcus's eyes shifted toward the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "It's more complicated than that. Your grandfather?" He left specific instructions. "About you, about the company, about everything." Before I could respond, the diner door burst open with such force that the bell practically screamed. Trevor Blackwood stood in the doorway, his usually perfect hair disheveled from the rain, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, striding toward our booth. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" Marcus calmly slipped the envelope back into his briefcase. "Hello, Trevor. Just grabbing some coffee." "Don't lie to me." Trevor's voice rose, causing the few remaining customers to look over. "Victoria's been trying to reach you all morning, and here you are, talking to her." The way he said her made my jaw clench. I'd grown up in the same house as Trevor and Madison, but they'd never let me forget that I didn't really belong, that my mother had been the hired help, not family. "Trevor," I said evenly, "you're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" He laughed harshly. "You're the one who's been sniffing around the lawyers, trying to get something you're not entitled to." "I haven't been sniffing around anyone." "Right. Just like you weren't asking questions about grandfather's offshore accounts last year?" Marcus stood up, placing a 20 on the table. "Tiffany, I'll be in touch. Trevor, you should probably head home before this weather gets worse." After Marcus left, Trevor leaned across the table, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Whatever little scheme you're cooking up, it won't work. Victoria's thought of everything. You're getting nothing, and that's exactly what you deserve." I stood up, untying my apron. "We'll see about that. Yeah, we will, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Hope you enjoy your reality check. Trevor stormed out, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the lingering smell of his expensive cologne mixed with diner grease. I finished my shift in a daze, my mind racing with questions about what Marcus had wanted to tell me. The drive home to my studio apartment took me through the wealthy district where I'd grown up. I couldn't help but slow down as I passed the Blackwood Mansion, a sprawling Georgian-style estate that had been in the family for 3 generations. Every window glowed with warm light, and I could see figures moving around inside. The family meeting was probably already in progress. My apartment was a far cry from the mansion's grandeur. 1 room, a kitchenette that barely deserved the name, and a bathroom with a shower that only worked if you held the handle just right. But it was mine, paid for with my own money, and that meant something. I was heating up leftover Chinese takeout when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Victoria's name, and I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. Tiffany. Victoria's voice was ice cold. I assume you heard about tomorrow's reading. Trevor mentioned it. Good, I want to make something very clear. Your grandfather's final wishes will be honored to the letter. The family business, the properties, the investments, all of it will remain in proper hands. I hope you understand what that means. I stirred my lo mein with unnecessary force. It means you got what you wanted. What the family deserves. What your grandfather always intended for his real heirs. There was a pause. I suppose you'll be there tomorrow, hoping for some small request. A token gesture. I'll be there. Wear something appropriate. This is an important family moment, and I won't have you embarrassing us in one of your work outfits. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, then at my reflection in the dark window. The girl looking back at me had tired eyes and hands rough from years of manual labor. Not exactly the image of a Blackwood heir. But appearances could be deceiving. I opened my laptop and logged into an encrypted email account that Victoria and her children had no idea existed. The subject line of the latest message made me smile for the first time all day. Final phase, ready for implementation. I'd been planning this moment for 5 years, ever since the day Victoria had called me into grandfather's study and explained that my expectations needed to be managed. She'd made it clear that I was tolerated in the family, not welcomed, that my mother's death didn't change the fact that I wasn't really a Blackwood. What Victoria didn't know was that grandfather had never stopped loving me, that the offshore accounts Trevor had mentioned weren't just rumors, and that the small bequest she expected me to receive tomorrow was going to be the least of her worries. I closed the laptop and finished my dinner, already imagining the looks on their faces when they realized that while they'd been fighting over crumbs, I'd already secured the whole bakery. Tomorrow's reading was going to be very interesting indeed. The law offices of Chen, Morrison and Associates occupied the entire 32nd floor of downtown Seattle's Columbia Tower. I arrived 20 minutes early, wearing the only decent dress I owned, a simple black number I'd bought for my mother's funeral 6 years ago. The receptionist, a woman with perfectly styled silver hair, looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain. "You must be here for the Blackwood reading," she said, not bothering to hide her assumption that I was some distant relative hoping for scraps. "Tiffany Blackwood Carter," I replied, using my full legal name. The hyphenated surname always caught people off guard. Carter had been my mother's maiden name, which grandfather had insisted I keep when he legally adopted me after she died. The receptionist's expression shifted slightly as she checked her appointment book. "Of course. Conference room A, the family is already assembled." I could hear voices through the heavy oak doors as I approached. Victoria's laugh, sharp and triumphant. Madison's voice, higher-pitched with excitement. And underneath it all, Trevor's deeper tones, probably already calculating how to spend his inheritance. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the doors. The conversation stopped immediately. Victoria sat at the head of the conference table like a queen holding court, wearing a black Chanel suit that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. Madison and Trevor flanked her on either side, both impeccably dressed and radiating confidence. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. "Tiffany," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "How punctual for you." "Victoria." I took the seat at the opposite end of the table, as far from them as possible. Madison, Trevor. Madison gave me a tight smile. I'm so sorry about your loss, Tiff. I know grandfather meant a lot to you. The condescension in her tone was unmistakable, as if grandfather had been some kindly old man who'd occasionally slipped me candy, rather than the person who'd raised me from age 12. He meant everything to me, I said quietly. Trevor leaned back in his chair, studying his manicured nails. Well, I suppose we'll see just how much you meant to him, won't we? Before I could respond, Marcus entered the room carrying a leather portfolio thick with documents. His assistant followed with additional boxes of files. Marcus looked tired, older than his 55 years, and when his eyes met mine, I saw something that might have been pity. Thank you all for coming, he began, settling into his chair. Before we begin, I want to express my condolences on Harold's passing. He was not only a client but a dear friend for over 20 years. Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I noticed they were perfectly dry. He was a wonderful man, a true patriarch who always puts family first. Indeed, Marcus said, opening his portfolio, which brings us to why we're here today. Harold was very specific about how he wanted his final wishes to be communicated. He pulled out a sealed envelope marked with my name in grandfather's distinctive handwriting. Tiffany, he asked that you receive this personal letter first, before we proceed with the formal reading. Victoria's spine stiffened. That's highly irregular, Marcus. Shouldn't we handle the estate matters first? Harold's instructions were very clear, Marcus replied firmly. Tiffany's letter first. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Grandfather's familiar script filled 2 pages, and as I read, my eyes filled with tears. My dearest Tiffany, if you're reading this, then the vultures have finally gathered to pick over my bones. By now, Victoria has no doubt made it clear that you shouldn't expect much from today. She's always underestimated you, just as she underestimated your mother. What she doesn't know is that you are not just my granddaughter by adoption, you are my granddaughter by blood. Your mother never told you the truth because I asked her not to. She was my daughter, born during a brief relationship I had before I met your grandmother. I supported her quietly throughout her life, and when she came to work for me, it was so we could finally have a relationship. Victoria has no idea. Neither do Trevor and Madison. They believe you're just the housekeeper's daughter I took pity on. Let them keep thinking that, for now. The trust I established for you when you turned 18 has been growing for 8 years. The offshore accounts, the Swiss investments, the property holdings in your name, all of it is yours. You've never been excluded from my will, my dear. You've already inherited everything that matters. The family business, the mansion, the flashy assets they're fighting over, those are just the visible pieces. The real Blackwood fortune has been yours since the day you graduated college. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I was protecting you from their greed. But now it's time for you to claim what's rightfully yours. All my love, grandfather. I carefully folded the letter, my hand shaking. The room was dead silent, everyone watching my face for clues about what I'd just learned. Well, Victoria's voice cut through the silence like a blade. What did the old man have to say? I looked up at her, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. The desperation beneath her perfectly applied makeup. The fear in her eyes that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't controlled this situation as completely as she'd thought. He said he loved me, I replied simply. Trevor snorted. I'm sure he did. Very touching. Can we get on with the real business now? Marcus cleared his throat. Of course. Let's begin with the formal reading. He lifted a thick document. This is the last will and testament of Harold James Blackwood, executed 6 months before his death and properly witnessed. Victoria leaned forward eagerly. Madison grabbed Trevor's hand. They were practically vibrating with anticipation. To my wife Victoria, Marcus read, I leave the family home on Mercer Island, along with all furnishings and personal effects therein, and a trust fund of $2 million to ensure her comfortable retirement. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. $2 million was a lot, but not nearly what she'd expected from a man worth hundreds of millions. To my stepchildren, Madison and Trevor Blackwood, I leave equal shares in Blackwood Industries, to be held in trust until they reach the age of 35, along with $1 million each in immediate inheritance. Now the confusion was plain on their faces. The company shares were valuable, but tied up for years. Trevor was only 28, Madison 26. And $1 million each felt almost insulting given the family's wealth. What about the rest? Victoria demanded. The investment portfolio? The international holdings? The real estate empire? Marcus glanced at me, then back at his document. Those assets are not addressed in this will. What do you mean they're not addressed? Trevor's voice rose. They have to go somewhere. Actually, Marcus said carefully, they don't, because Harold no longer owned those assets at the time of his death. The silence that followed was deafening. What are you talking about? Victoria's composure was cracking. Of course he owned them. He was worth $300 million. Marcus reached into one of the boxes his assistant had brought and pulled out another thick folder. The assets you're referring to were transferred into an irrevocable trust 8 years ago. The beneficiary of that trust has been receiving the income and growth from those investments since she turned 18. Victoria's face went white. She? Marcus looked directly at me. Tiffany, you've been the sole owner of the Blackwood fortune since 2016. Your grandfather structured it this way to protect the assets from estate taxes and other complications. The room erupted. That's impossible. Trevor jumped to his feet. She's not even really family. There has to be a mistake, Madison's voice cracked. Grandfather would never. How dare you? Victoria slammed her hand on the table. I'll contest this. I'll fight it in court. Some bastard child doesn't get to steal my family's legacy. Through all the shouting, I sat quietly, processing everything. Grandfather's letter had prepared me for some of this, but the magnitude was overwhelming. I wasn't just receiving an inheritance. I already owned everything. Marcus raised his voice above the chaos. The trust documents are ironclad and have been in effect for nearly a decade. There are no grounds for contesting something that was legally transferred years ago. Victoria turned to me, her mask finally slipping completely. The elegant society matron was gone, replaced by something desperate and ugly. You manipulative little bitch. You planned this, didn't you? You seduced a sick old man into giving you everything. Victoria, I said quietly, and something in my tone made everyone stop shouting. I found out about this 30 seconds ago, same as you. Liar. The trust documents are public record, Marcus interjected. Anyone could have discovered this years ago with the right legal research. But they hadn't looked, I realized. They'd been so confident in their position, so certain that I was just the help's daughter they were barely tolerating, that they'd never thought to investigate. Trevor sank back into his chair, his face pale. How much are we talking about? Marcus consulted his papers. The trust is currently valued at approximately $420 million. Madison made a choking sound. Victoria looked like she might faint. And for the first time in years, I smiled. The silence in the conference room stretched for what felt like an eternity before Victoria erupted like a volcano. This is fraud, she screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at Marcus. You helped her steal from us. I'll have your license revoked. Marcus remained calm, his years of legal experience evident. Mrs. Blackwood, I understand you're upset, but these arrangements were made entirely by your late husband. I simply executed his instructions. Instructions to rob his own family. Trevor's face had turned an alarming shade of red. There has to be something we can do. Some legal loophole. Actually, I said, standing up from my chair, there's something else you should know. All eyes turned to me. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, scrolling to a document I'd photographed years ago. 3 years ago, when Grandfather had his second stroke, Victoria took power of attorney over his medical decisions. She also tried to get power of attorney over his financial affairs. I showed them the screen. This is the court filing she submitted, claiming Grandfather was mentally incompetent. Victoria's eyes widened in horror as she realized where this was going. The same document she used to try to control his money also states, under oath, that Harold Blackwood was not of sound mind for the past 3 years, which means, legally speaking, she can't now claim he was competent enough to have been manipulated by me. Marcus actually smiled at this. Very astute, Tiffany. Mrs. Blackwood's own legal filings create what we call judicial estoppel. She can't argue both sides of the competency issue. You little snake, Victoria hissed. You've been planning this for years. No, Victoria, I've been surviving. There's a difference. Madison, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly burst into tears. This isn't fair. We're his real children. We grew up in that house. So did I replied quietly, until you all made it clear I wasn't wanted. Because you weren't family, Trevor exploded. You were the maid's daughter. Mom took pity on you. Actually, Marcus interjected, pulling out another document. Harold's letter mentioned something about that. Tiffany, he wanted this DNA analysis made public if necessary. My heart stopped. I'd known from his letter that my mother was his daughter, making me his biological granddaughter, but seeing the scientific proof was different. Marcus handed me the lab report. Harold had this done 2 years ago, using hair samples from your mother's personal effects and a sample from you during a family dinner. I stared at the paper, seeing the clear results. 99.9% probability of grandfather-granddaughter relationship. That's impossible, Madison whispered. Your mother was just his daughter, I finished, born before he married your grandmother. He supported her quietly, her entire life. The room fell dead silent again. Victoria's face cycled through several emotions: shock, disbelief, and finally, a cold calculation that I recognized all too well. Even if that's true, she said slowly, it doesn't change anything. Harold raised Trevor and Madison. He loved them like his own children. A secret bastard daughter doesn't erase 28 years of family. You're right, I agreed. It doesn't erase anything. But it does explain why he made sure I was taken care of. Trevor slammed his fist on the table. Taken care of? You got everything. We got scraps. You got exactly what you earned, I shot back, my patience finally snapping. Do you want to know what I've been doing for the past 8 years while you two were partying your way through college on grandfather's dime? I was working. Every day. Saving every penny. Working at a diner? Madison said dismissively. Working everywhere. The diner was just my latest job. I've been a house cleaner, a dog walker, a grocery store clerk, a nanny. And do you know why? They stared at me blankly. Because I didn't know about the trust. Grandfather never told me. I thought I was truly on my own after he died, so I learned to be self-sufficient. While you two were spending his money, I was earning my own. Victoria's eyes narrowed. If you didn't know about the money, how did you afford college? It was a good question, and I'd been wondering when someone would ask it. Student loans and scholarships. I worked 3 jobs to pay for my business degree. Grandfather offered to help, but I wanted to do it myself. Business degree? Trevor scoffed. From some community college? From Stanford, actually. Full scholarship based on merit. The admission hit them like a slap. Madison's mouth fell open. Trevor looked like he'd been punched. Marcus consulted his watch. If there are no other questions about the will, I do have other appointments today. Wait, Victoria said desperately. There has to be something. Some provision for the family business. Trevor was supposed to take over Blackwood Industries. The company shares are part of the trust, Marcus explained patiently. Tiffany now controls 51% of Blackwood Industries. Trevor and Madison's combined shares give them significant influence, but not control. Trevor's face went ashen. She could fire us. She could dissolve the company entirely if she chose, Marcus confirmed. This is insane. Madison stood up abruptly. Tiffany, you can't seriously be considering keeping all of this. We're family. Family? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. When have you ever treated me like family? When you locked me out of the house in the rain when I was 14? When you told everyone at school that I was just the help? When you convinced your friends to dump pig's blood on me at prom? Madison had the grace to look ashamed at that last one. We were kids. We didn't know better. You were 18, Madison, and it wasn't just when we were kids. Last Christmas, when I came to visit grandfather, you made me eat dinner in the kitchen. You introduced me to your boyfriend as the girl who does odd jobs around the house. That's different. No, it's not. You've spent your entire lives making sure I knew I didn't belong, and now you're upset that grandfather disagreed with you. Victoria stepped forward, and I saw her shift tactics in real time. The anger disappeared, replaced by a calculated vulnerability. "Tiffany, sweetheart," she said in a voice I'd never heard her use with me before. "I know we haven't always gotten along, but we're all grieving. Maybe we said things we didn't mean. You're right, we should have treated you better, but that doesn't mean you should punish the children. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just not rewarding bad behavior. But think about what Harold would have wanted. He loved Trevor and Madison. He raised them. Surely he wouldn't want them to struggle financially. They're not struggling. They each got $1 million and company shares worth several million more. That's more than most people see in a lifetime." Trevor found his voice again. "But it's nothing compared to what you got." "What I got," I said, standing and gathering my purse, "I got because grandfather planned it that way. If you have a problem with his decisions, take it up with his grave." I headed for the door, but Victoria's voice stopped me. "Where are you going?" "Back to work. I have a shift tonight." "You're going back to that diner? After finding out you're worth $400 million? I turned to face them one last time. "I'm going back to my life, the life I built without any help from any of you. The money doesn't change who I am." "But it changes everything else," Madison said desperately. "The company, the family dynamics, everything." "Yes," I agreed. "It does." As I walked toward the elevator, I could hear them erupting into arguments behind me. Victoria was already planning legal strategies. Trevor was demanding they call other lawyers. Madison was crying about how unfair life was. The elevator doors closed, cutting off their voices, and I finally allowed myself to breathe. In the reflection of the polished steel doors, I saw a woman I barely recognized, tired, overwhelmed, but somehow stronger than she'd been this morning. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Congratulations on your inheritance. We should talk. James Morrison, senior partner." Then another from Victoria. "This isn't over." And finally, one from Marcus. "Your grandfather would be proud. Call me when you're ready to discuss next steps." I deleted Victoria's message without responding and put my phone away. The elevator reached the ground floor, and I stepped out into the busy Seattle afternoon. People rushed past me on their way to important meetings and urgent appointments, completely unaware that the woman in the simple black dress walking among them had just become one of the wealthiest people in the city. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my entire life being invisible to my own family, and now I held their future in my hands. The question was, what was I going to do with that power? The morning after the will reading, I called in sick to the diner for the first time in 3 years. I needed time to think, and more importantly, I needed to make some phone calls that would change everything. My first call was to James Morrison, the senior partner who had texted me. His secretary put me through immediately, a courtesy that wealth apparently bought you. "Miss Carter," his voice was warm and professional. "I was Harold's personal attorney for the final years of his life. Marcus handled the estate work, but I structured the trust arrangements. We need to meet." "Why?" "Because there are aspects of your inheritance that weren't discussed yesterday. Harold left specific instructions for me to share with you only after the will reading was complete." 2 hours later, I sat in Morrison's corner office, which occupied half of the 34th floor with panoramic views of Elliott Bay. The man himself was in his 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of presence that suggested he'd never lost an important case. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man," he began, sliding a thick folder across his mahogany desk, "and he was far more devious than anyone gave him credit for." I opened the folder to find documents I'd never seen before: corporate structures, shell companies, international holdings. The numbers made my head spin. The $420 million Marcus mentioned yesterday, that's just the domestic holdings. The complete portfolio is worth roughly $800 million. I nearly choked on my coffee. $800 million? Harold spent the last decade quietly moving assets into untraceable structures. Cayman Island accounts, Swiss banks, real estate holdings through shell corporations. All of it ultimately controlled by your trust, but invisible to anyone who might try to challenge your inheritance. Why all the secrecy? Morrison leaned back in his chair. Because he knew Victoria would fight, he also knew she'd been embezzling from the company for years. That hit me like a physical blow. What? Harold discovered it 18 months ago. She'd been skimming from vendor accounts, inflating expenses, redirecting funds to personal accounts. Over the past 5 years, she's stolen approximately $12 million. I stared at the evidence he spread before me: bank records, forged invoices, altered contracts. Victoria's signature was on everything. Why didn't he prosecute her? He was protecting Trevor and Madison. A public scandal would have destroyed them. Instead, he quietly secured evidence and made other arrangements. Morrison pulled out another document. This gives you the legal authority to recover every stolen penny, with interest. My hands shook as I reviewed the paperwork. She could go to prison. For 20 years minimum. Harold didn't want that for the mother of his stepchildren, but he also wouldn't let her get away with it. The choice of what to do with this information is now yours. I set the papers down, overwhelmed. There's more, isn't there? Much more. Blackwood Industries is just the tip of the iceberg. Your grandfather owned controlling interests in 17 other companies, including 3 that Victoria doesn't even know exist. He also owned the building that houses her favorite boutique, the country club where she plays tennis, and the condo in Aspen where she takes her annual ski trips. He owned all that? You own all that. Harold transferred everything to you gradually over the years, using different legal structures to avoid detection. Victoria has been paying rent to you for 3 years without knowing it. I laughed despite myself. That's almost poetic. It gets better. Remember the charity gala Victoria chaired last year? The one where she was photographed presenting a giant check for $2 million? The Children's Hospital fundraiser. She wouldn't stop talking about it. She raised the money through the Blackwood Foundation, which she believed your grandfather controlled. What she didn't know is that he'd already transferred ownership of the foundation to you. Every dollar she raised, every tax benefit she claimed, every bit of social credit she received, it was all done using your money and your foundation. The irony was almost too much to process. Victoria had been unknowingly working for me while treating me like dirt. Morrison pulled out a final set of documents. And then there's this: Harold's insurance policy against any attempts to contest your inheritance. What kind of insurance policy? Video recordings. Hidden cameras throughout the mansion. Recorded over the past 2 years. Every conversation, every cruel comment, every plan they made to cut you out of the family. It's all documented. He turned his laptop toward me and pressed play. Victoria's voice filled the room, crystal clear. The little bitch thinks she belongs here. Harold's getting soft in his old age, but when he dies, she'll learn her place. I'll make sure she doesn't get a single penny. Then Trevor's voice. We should have shipped her off to boarding school years ago, or, better yet, foster care. Madison's laugh was particularly cutting. Remember when she asked to borrow a dress for her college interview? I told her she should get used to shopping at thrift stores, because that's where people like her belong. Morrison paused the video. There are over 200 hours of recordings. Your grandfather documented everything. I felt sick. Hearing their cruelty played back was somehow worse than living through it. Why would he do this? Protection. If they had contested the will, if they had tried to claim undue influence or diminished capacity, Harold wanted you to have the evidence to destroy them completely. Their own words, their own schemes, their own cruelty, all recorded and admissible in court. Morrison closed the laptop and leaned forward. Tiffany, your grandfather didn't just leave you money, he left you weapons. The question is, what do you want to do with them? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. Excuse me, I said, answering the call. Tiffany, Marcus's voice was tight with tension. We have a problem. Victoria has filed an emergency motion, claiming fraud and undue influence. She's also hired Preston and Associates to challenge the trust structure. Preston and Associates. Even I knew that name. They were the most aggressive litigation firm in Seattle, the kind that took cases they were confident they could win. Can they do that? They can try. But there's something else. Victoria held a press conference an hour ago. My blood ran cold. What did she say? She's claiming that Harold was senile, that you manipulated him, and that the real family is being cheated out of their rightful inheritance. It's all over the local news. I looked at Morrison, who had been listening to my side of the conversation. He nodded grimly. Marcus, I said, can you meet me at Morrison's office? We need to discuss strategy. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and turned to Morrison. They're going nuclear. So it seems. The question is, are you prepared to respond in kind? I thought about the recordings, the embezzlement evidence, the years of cruelty and exclusion. I thought about my mother, who had died never knowing she could have claimed her rightful place in the family. I thought about all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, wondering why I wasn't good enough to be loved by the people who were supposed to care about me. What would happen if I released everything? The recordings, the embezzlement evidence, all of it. Morrison's smile was cold and professional. Victoria would be ruined, criminally and socially. Trevor and Madison would be humiliated. The family name would be destroyed. And if I don't? They'll spend years in court trying to take what's yours. They'll drag your name through the mud, claim you're a gold digger and a manipulator. They'll make your life hell. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd grown up as an outsider in my own family. Down below, people went about their daily lives, unaware that a war was about to begin in the gleaming towers above them. My phone buzzed with a text from Trevor. You won't get away with this. We know who you really are. Then another from Madison. Everyone's going to see what a fraud you are. And finally, one from Victoria. You should have taken the scraps we offered you. Now you'll get nothing. I turned back to Morrison, who was watching me with the patience of a man who had seen many people wrestle with difficult decisions. Mr. Morrison, I said quietly, I think it's time Victoria learned who she's really been dealing with all these years. His smile was sharp as a blade. Excellent. Let's begin. As if on cue, my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Miss Carter? This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I understand you'd like to respond to Mrs. Blackwood's allegations? I looked at Morrison, who nodded encouragingly. Actually, Ms. Walsh, I think I would, but I'll need some time to gather my materials. Would this evening work for you? Absolutely. We can have a crew at your location by 6. Perfect. I'll see you then. I hung up and smiled at Morrison. Game on. The Channel 7 news van pulled up to my apartment building at exactly 6 p.m., drawing curious stares from my neighbors. I'd spent the afternoon preparing, with Morrison's help, selecting which pieces of evidence would be most effective on camera without revealing everything in my arsenal. Jennifer Walsh was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and an air of barely contained ambition. As her crew set up their equipment in my tiny living space, she studied me with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. This is quite a story, she said, reviewing her notes. Victoria Blackwood claims you manipulated a sick old man into leaving you hundreds of millions of dollars. She says you're not even really family. Victoria says a lot of things, I replied calmly. Not all of them are true. The interview began with standard questions about my relationship with Harold, my life growing up in the family, my work history. I answered honestly, painting a picture of someone who had been excluded and mistreated but had never expected any inheritance. Then Jennifer leaned forward, going for the kill shot. Mrs. Blackwood provided us with some interesting information. She says you were fired from 3 different jobs for theft, that you had gambling debts, and that you've been in and out of rehab. How do you respond to those allegations? I'd been expecting this. Morrison had warned me that Victoria would try to destroy my character. Jennifer, I've never been fired from any job. I've never gambled, and I've never used drugs or alcohol. But I can prove Victoria is lying about more than just my background. I pulled out a folder. These are employment records from every job I've held since I was 16. Perfect attendance, commendations, positive references. Victoria made those accusations because she's desperate. Desperate how? Because she's been stealing from the family company for years, and she knows I have the evidence to prove it. Jennifer's eyes lit up. This was the kind of scoop that made careers. Can you substantiate that claim? I slid a carefully selected bank record across the table. This shows a transfer of $250,000 from Blackwood Industries to an account controlled by Victoria, payment for services from a company called Meridian Consulting. The problem is, Meridian Consulting doesn't exist. It's a shell company Victoria created to funnel money to herself. The camera zoomed in on the document as Jennifer examined it. How did you obtain this? Harold discovered the theft before he died. He had his attorneys investigate. There are dozens of similar transactions totaling over $12 million. $12 million? And you're saying Victoria Blackwood embezzled this money? I'm saying the evidence speaks for itself. As the interview continued, I carefully revealed just enough to devastate Victoria's credibility without showing my entire hand. The gambling debts Victoria mentioned? Those belonged to Trevor, who owed over $300,000 to various casinos. The rehab story? That was Madison, who had spent 6 months in a private facility for cocaine addiction 2 years ago. After the crew left, I called Morrison. It's done, I told him. The interview airs at 11. Excellent. And our other preparations? In motion. I should have confirmation within the hour. The confirmation came in the form of a phone call from Dr. Patricia Nguyen, Harold's longtime physician. She'd agreed to meet with me after I explained the situation. Your grandfather was sharp as a tack until the day he died, Dr. Nguyen said when I arrived at her office. Victoria's claims about dementia or diminished capacity are completely false. In fact, Harold specifically asked me to document his mental state in his final months, as if he knew someone might challenge his competence. She handed me a thick medical file. Cognitive tests, psychiatric evaluations, neurological scans, everything shows a man in complete control of his faculties. Harold scored higher on cognitive tests at age 78 than most people do at 50. Would you be willing to testify to that? Absolutely. Harold was a good friend as well as a patient. I won't let anyone tarnish his memory with lies. As I left Dr. Nguyen's office, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Is this Tiffany Carter? Yes. This is Robert Chen, Marcus's brother. I work for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We need to talk. My blood ran cold. About what? About Victoria Blackwood. We've been investigating her for money laundering, and your evidence might be exactly what we need to build our case. We met at a coffee shop downtown, where Robert explained that the FBI had been tracking suspicious financial activity linked to several shell companies Victoria had created. The Blackwood Industries embezzlement was just part of a larger scheme involving fake vendors, inflated contracts, and offshore accounts. How long have you been investigating her? I asked. 8 months. We know she's guilty, but we haven't been able to prove the source of the initial funds she was laundering. Your grandfather's documentation could be the missing link. What would happen to her? Federal money laundering charges carry a 20-year sentence. Add in the embezzlement, tax evasion, and wire fraud, and she's looking at life in prison. I stared into my coffee, processing this information. I'd wanted to fight back against Victoria's lies, but I hadn't expected to potentially send her to federal prison. There's something else, Robert continued. We have reason to believe Trevor and Madison were involved. Bank records show they received regular payments from the shell companies. They knew about the embezzlement. At minimum, they were willfully ignorant about where their money was coming from. More likely, they were active participants. My phone rang before I could respond. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. Tiffany, where are you? We have a problem. What kind of problem? Victoria just filed a restraining order against you. She's claiming you're threatening her and her children. There's going to be a hearing tomorrow morning. I looked at Robert Chen, who had been listening to my conversation. Tell your lawyer I'll testify on your behalf, he said quietly. The FBI doesn't appreciate people trying to use the court system to obstruct our investigations. After I hung up with Marcus, Robert leaned forward. Tiffany, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Are you planning to use your inheritance to seek revenge against Victoria and her children? I don't need to seek revenge, I replied. The truth is enough. Good, because we're going to need your cooperation over the next few months. This investigation is bigger than just Victoria. We think she was working with organized crime figures to launder money through legitimate businesses. The implications hit me like a truck. You're saying my grandfather's company was being used by criminals? We're saying Victoria opened that door. The question is whether you'll help us close it. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a series of text messages. The first was from a number I didn't recognize. "We know where you live. Back off, or you'll regret it." The second was from Madison. "Tiffany, please call me. We need to talk. This has gone too far." The third was from Trevor. "You're destroying our family. Is your money worth ruining all of us?" And the final message was from a blocked number. "Your mother didn't die in an accident. Stop digging or you'll join her." I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking. My mother had died in a car crash when I was 20, a tragedy that had devastated both Harold and me. The police report had been clear. She'd fallen asleep at the wheel driving home from a double shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. But now, with everything I'd learned about Victoria's criminal activities, I wondered if there was more to the story. I called Morrison immediately. "I need you to hire a private investigator," I said. "I want to know everything about my mother's death. Every detail, every witness, every piece of evidence." "Tiffany, what's brought this on?" I read him the threatening messages. "Someone doesn't want me digging into the past, which makes me think there's something there to find. I'll have someone on it within the hour. In the meantime, you need security. These threats are serious." "I can take care of myself." "Not against organized crime figures, you can't. I'm sending a protection detail to your apartment tonight." As I hung up, I realized that what had started as a family inheritance dispute had morphed into something much more dangerous. Victoria hadn't just been stealing money. She'd been playing with people who killed to protect their secrets. And somehow, I was now right in the middle of it. My phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Nguyen. "Tiffany, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. There's something I didn't mention about your mother's death." "What?" "The night she died, she called me. She was scared, and said she'd discovered something at work that could get her in trouble. She wanted to know if I thought she should go to the police." "What did you tell her?" "I told her to trust her instincts. She said she was going to drive over to Harold's house to talk to him about it. She never made it." The pieces were starting to come together, and the picture they formed was terrifying. My mother had discovered something, probably Victoria's embezzlement in its early stages, and she died before she could expose it. Which meant Victoria had been covering up her crimes for much longer than anyone realized. And it meant I was the only person left who could make sure my mother's death hadn't been in vain. The private investigator Morrison hired worked fast. By 7 a.m. the next morning, Detective Sarah Mills was sitting in my kitchen with a file that would change everything I thought I knew about my mother's death. "Your mother's car was tampered with," she said without preamble. "The brake lines were severed, but the police report was altered to hide that fact. Someone paid good money to make sure this looked like an accident." My coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering on the floor. "You're certain?" "I found the original forensics report buried in a retired detective's personal files. He kept copies of cases he thought were suspicious." "Your mother was murdered, Tiffany, and whoever did it had connections in the police department." The restraining order hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m., but this changed everything. I called Marcus immediately. "We need to meet at the courthouse early," I told him, "and bring Robert Chen. This is about to become a criminal matter." An hour later, we gathered in a conference room at the King County Courthouse. Marcus looked grim as he reviewed the detective's findings. Robert Chen was on his phone with FBI headquarters, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "This connects to our investigation," Robert said after ending his call. "We've been tracking payments from Victoria's shell companies to a man named Vincent Kowalski. He's a known associate of the Torino crime family. They specialize in making problems disappear." "Problems like my mother?" "Problems like witnesses to financial crimes. Your mother worked at the hospital where Victoria was treating fake injuries to collect insurance payouts. She would have seen the medical records, knowing they were fraudulent." Marcus set down the detective's report. "Tiffany, this is no longer just about inheritance fraud. If Victoria ordered your mother's murder, we're talking about a death penalty case." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "Emergency family meeting. Grandfather's study. Come alone or mom destroys everything." I showed the message to Robert, who immediately shook his head. "Absolutely not. It's obviously a trap." "Maybe," I said, "but it's also an opportunity. If Victoria's desperate enough to call this meeting, she might reveal something we can use." Or she might have you killed. Marcus leaned forward. What if we wire you? Give you a way to record whatever she says? Robert considered this. We'd need backup nearby. And you'd have to get her to admit to the murder on tape. It's dangerous. Everything about this situation is dangerous. But if I don't go, she'll destroy evidence we might never recover. 2 hours later, I sat in the back of an FBI surveillance van while a technician fitted me with a nearly invisible recording device. The van was parked 3 blocks from the Blackwood mansion, close enough for the team to respond quickly, but far enough away to avoid detection. Remember, Robert said, get her talking about your mother. People who've gotten away with murder for years sometimes want to brag about how clever they were. I walked up the familiar driveway with my heart pounding. The mansion looked the same as always. Imposing, perfectly maintained, a monument to old money and older secrets. But now I knew what horrors had been planned within its walls. Victoria opened the door herself, which was unusual. The household staff had been dismissed, I realized. She wanted no witnesses to whatever was about to happen. Tiffany, she said with a cold smile, so good of you to come. We have so much to discuss. The study looked exactly as it had when Grandfather was alive. His massive desk still dominated the room. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, and his collection of rare books filled floor-to-ceiling shelves. But the atmosphere was wrong, charged with menace instead of warmth. Trevor and Madison sat on the leather sofa, both looking uncomfortable. Victoria positioned herself behind Grandfather's desk like a general preparing for battle. I assume you've seen the news coverage of your little performance, Victoria began. Very dramatic, very convincing. I told the truth. The truth? Victoria laughed harshly. You wouldn't know the truth if it bit you, just like your mother. My pulse quickened. She was already bringing up my mother without prompting. What's that supposed to mean? Your mother was always sticking her nose where it didn't belong. Always asking questions, always digging into things that weren't her concern. Victoria's voice grew colder. She thought she was so clever, so moral. She had no idea what she was dealing with. Victoria, Trevor said nervously, maybe we should focus on… Shut up, Trevor. Victoria's attention never left me. Do you want to know what really happened to your precious mother, Tiffany? Tell me. Victoria walked around the desk, moving closer. She discovered some discrepancies in my business arrangements. Nothing major. A few inflated invoices, some creative accounting. But instead of coming to me like a civilized person, she went straight to Harold. Because you were stealing. I was ensuring my family's future. Harold was getting old, making poor decisions. He would have given everything to charity if I hadn't intervened. Victoria's composure was cracking. Your mother threatened to ruin everything. She said she was going to the police. So you killed her. I protected my children. Their inheritance, their future, their reputation. Everything was at stake because one nosy nurse couldn't mind her own business. Madison gasped. Mom, what are you saying? But Victoria was lost in her justifications now, the words pouring out like poison. It was supposed to look like an accident. Vincent assured me it would be clean, simple. Your mother would fall asleep at the wheel, crash into a tree, and that would be the end of it. Vincent Kowalski, I said, hoping to get more details on record. Vincent understood the situation, understood what needed to be done. $50,000, and the problem disappeared forever. Trevor stood up abruptly. Mom, stop talking, please. Why should I stop? She's going to ruin us anyway. Might as well tell her exactly what she's dealing with. Victoria turned back to me. Do you think your mother's death was the first time I had to make difficult decisions? Harold's brother Charles asked too many questions about the books. Grandfather's first wife, Eleanor, started getting suspicious about some real estate transactions. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of Grandfather's antique clock. Victoria had just confessed to 3 murders. Madison was crying now. Mom, please tell me you're lying. Please tell me you didn't really. I did what I had to do to protect this family, Victoria screamed. Everything I've done has been for you and Trevor, to secure your futures, to maintain our position, to preserve what's rightfully ours. By murdering people? I asked quietly. By eliminating obstacles. Your mother was going to destroy everything. Charles was asking questions that would have led to an investigation. Eleanor was threatening to change her will. Victoria's eyes were wild now. They all had to be stopped. I thought about the recording device, hoping it was capturing every word of this insane confession. And now you're going to eliminate me? Victoria smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen. Oh, Tiffany, I already have. Before I could ask what she meant, the study door burst open. 3 men in expensive suits entered, and I recognized one of them from FBI photos Robert had shown me. Vincent Kowalski himself. Vincent, Victoria said calmly, as if she were greeting a dinner guest. Perfect timing. Vincent was a compact man with cold eyes and scarred hands. He looked at me like I was a problem he'd been hired to solve. Is this girl causing trouble? He asked. This is Harold's granddaughter, the one I told you about. Mom, Madison jumped to her feet. You can't be serious. Sit down, Madison. This doesn't concern you. Trevor backed toward the window. I'm calling the police. No, you're not. One of Vincent's associates moved to block Trevor's path. Nobody's calling anybody. Vincent studied me with professional interest. You know, Mrs. Blackwood, this one looks just like her mother. Same stubborn expression right before the end. You killed my mother, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Lady, I've killed a lot of people. Your mother was just another payday, Vincent shrugged. Nothing personal. It's personal to me. Vincent laughed. Yeah, well, you won't be personalizing anything for much longer. That's when the windows exploded inward. FBI agents poured through every entrance. Windows, doors, even the skylight. Robert Chen was the first through the main door, his weapon drawn and trained on Vincent. FBI, everyone on the ground, now! The next few minutes were chaotic. Vincent's men reached for their weapons but found themselves outnumbered and outgunned. Victoria screamed about her rights and demanded her lawyer. Trevor and Madison cowered on the sofa, finally understanding the full scope of their mother's crimes. As the agents cuffed Victoria, she turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. You think you've won? You think this is over? It's over, Victoria. The Torino family doesn't forget debts. Vincent wasn't the only one I've done business with. They'll come for you, Tiffany. They'll come for everyone you care about. Robert Chen stepped between us. She's trying to scare you. We've been tracking the Torino organization for years. This arrest will give us everything we need to bring them all down. As they led Victoria away, she looked back one final time. You'll never be safe. Never. But for the first time in my life, surrounded by federal agents and finally knowing the truth about my mother's death, I felt something I'd never experienced before in that house. I felt free. 6 months later, I stood in the same courthouse where Victoria's restraining order hearing was supposed to have taken place. But instead of defending myself against false accusations, I was watching her receive 3 consecutive life sentences for murder, plus an additional 40 years for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy charges. The judge's words echoed through the packed courtroom. Mrs. Blackwood, your crimes represent a betrayal of family, community, and basic human decency that this court finds particularly heinous. You have shown no remorse for destroying multiple lives in pursuit of personal gain. Victoria sat motionless at the defendant's table, her expensive clothes replaced by an orange jumpsuit, her perfectly styled hair now gray at the roots. She never looked back as the bailiffs led her away to begin serving what amounted to several life sentences. Vincent Kowalski had been sentenced the week before death penalty for multiple murders, including my mother's. His confession, given in exchange for taking the death sentence off the table for his associates, had blown open the entire Torino crime family operation. 17 people were now behind bars because of the evidence that started with Victoria's embezzlement scheme. As the courtroom emptied, I noticed Trevor and Madison sitting together in the back row. They'd both testified against their mother in exchange for immunity. Their involvement had been limited to receiving money they should have questioned, not actively participating in the crimes. Trevor approached me hesitantly as I gathered my belongings. Tiffany, he said quietly, could we talk? I studied his face. The arrogant entitlement was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. Madison stood behind him, her eyes red from crying. What about? About everything. About how we treated you. About trying to make things right. We walked to a nearby coffee shop, the same one where I'd met Robert Chen all those months ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. I know we can never make up for what we did to you, Madison began, her voice barely above a whisper. The way we treated you, the things we said, the way we made you feel like you didn't belong. You made my childhood hell, I said bluntly. Both of you. Trevor nodded miserably. We know. And we know sorry isn't enough. But we need you to understand. We had no idea about Mom. About what she was doing, what she was capable of. Didn't you? The expensive trips, the designer clothes, the unlimited spending money? None of that seemed suspicious when the company was supposedly struggling. Madison winced. We didn't want to ask questions. We liked the lifestyle. We were spoiled and selfish, and we didn't care where the money came from as long as it kept coming. But we never knew about the murders, Trevor added quickly. God, Tiffany, if we'd known what she did to your mother, to Uncle Charles, to great-grandmother Eleanor, would it have mattered? Would you have treated me any differently? They were both quiet for a long moment. Finally, Trevor spoke. Probably not. And that's something we'll have to live with for the rest of our lives. He pulled out an envelope. We know we don't deserve forgiveness. We know we can't undo 20 years of cruelty. But maybe we can do something right for once. I opened the envelope to find legal documents transferring their remaining Blackwood Industries shares to me, along with their inherited $1 million each. We don't want anything that came from her, Madison explained. We're starting over. Trevor's going back to school to become a teacher. I'm enrolling in a nursing program. You're giving up millions of dollars to become a teacher and a nurse? We're giving up blood money to become decent human beings, Trevor corrected. Something we should have tried to be a long time ago. I studied the documents, then looked at my half-siblings, really looked at them for the first time since we were children. They were broken, ashamed, and trying to find a way to live with what their mother had done in their names. Keep the money, I said, pushing the envelope back toward them. Use it for school, for starting your new lives. But I want something else from you. Anything, Madison said immediately. I want you to help me build something better. Something that honors the people Victoria destroyed. Over the next hour, I outlined my plans for the Martha Carter Foundation, named after my mother. It would provide scholarships for nursing students, fund free clinics in underserved communities, and support families of crime victims. Trevor and Madison would serve on the board, but more importantly, they would work at the foundation's community centers, serving the kind of people they'd once looked down upon. You want us to work for you? Trevor asked, not with resentment but with something like hope. I want you to work with me, to honor our grandfather's memory by actually helping people instead of just accumulating wealth. Madison was crying again, but these were different tears. You'd trust us to do that, after everything? I'd trust you to try. What you do with that trust is up to you. 6 months after that conversation, I stood in the lobby of the Martha Carter Community Health Center, watching Madison check in patients for their free medical appointments, while Trevor taught literacy classes to adults who'd never learned to read. The transformation wasn't complete. Healing from decades of entitlement and cruelty took time, but it was real. The Blackwood mansion had been sold, with the proceeds going to the Victims' Compensation Fund. I'd bought a modest house in a working-class neighborhood, close enough to the community center to walk to work every day. The $800 million inheritance sat mostly untouched in trust accounts, growing steadily as it funded dozens of charitable initiatives. I kept working at Mel's Diner 2 days a week, despite the fact that I could buy the entire restaurant chain if I wanted to. Jake, the cook, thought I was crazy, but I needed that connection to the person I'd been before the money changed everything. Order up, boss lady, he called one Tuesday morning, sliding a plate of eggs across the pass. I'm not the boss of anything, I called back, delivering the plate to table 3. Lady worth $1 billion slinging hash. If that doesn't make you the boss of something, I don't know what does. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see Marcus Chen entering. He'd become more than just my lawyer over the past year. He was one of the few people who remembered me before the inheritance, who saw me as Tiffany the person rather than Tiffany the billionaire. Morning, Marcus? Coffee? Actually, I have some news you'll want to hear privately. We walked to the back booth, the same one where he'd first told me about grandfather's secret plans. The FBI finished their investigation into the Torino family, he said. With Vincent's confession and Victoria's recorded admissions, they've dismantled the entire organization. The threats against you are over, permanently. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized was still there. It's really finished? It's really finished. You're safe, Tiffany. You can live your life without looking over your shoulder. As Marcus left, I returned to my tables, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been the excluded family member, working double shifts and living paycheck to paycheck. Now I was one of the wealthiest people in the country, but I was also something more important. I was free. Free from the toxic family dynamics that had defined my childhood. Free from the fear that had shadowed me since learning about my mother's murder. Free to build the kind of life that would have made both my mother and grandfather proud. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Nguyen. Saw the news about the community center's expansion. Your grandfather would be so proud of what you've built. Then another from Robert Chen. Final arrests in the Torino case made this morning. It's over. Congratulations. And finally one from Madison. Thank you for giving us a chance to be better. The literacy program just got its 100th graduate. I smiled, pocketing my phone as I wiped down the counter one more time before my shift ended. Through the diner's window, I could see the Seattle skyline where Victoria was now spending her life in federal prison, where Trevor was teaching children to read, where Madison was helping sick people get the care they needed. The Blackwood family legacy had been built on cruelty, crime, and the accumulation of wealth at any cost. But that legacy is over now. In its place, something new was growing, a legacy of service, healing, and justice for those who had been wronged. As I hung up my apron and prepared to walk to the community center for the afternoon board meeting, I thought about the champagne toast Victoria had made in that conference room so many months ago. She'd raised her glass to the Blackwood legacy, never knowing that the real legacy was already being written by the granddaughter she'd tried so hard to destroy. The granddaughter who had inherited everything, not just the money but the responsibility to use it wisely. The granddaughter who had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you could improve and the wrongs you could make right. The granddaughter who had finally, truly come home. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.